Hi, I'm Timothy Batten, and you're watching Welcome Home Doggy, where we talk about creating a better quality of life for all dogs. Joining us today is Kathleen Summers, the Director of Outreach and Research and the Puppy Mills Campaign for the Humane Society of the United States. Stay tuned, and we'll be right back. Kathleen, hi. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me today.
Wonderful. Absolutely. This is something that we're very much into talking about right now. We've had several guests, but we can't wait to hear what you have to say about the puppy mill problem in the United States and probably globally if we're going that far. So could you tell us a little bit about your organization, how you guys approach this problem, and basically what we're dealing with as far as a puppy mill?
Sure. At the Humane Society of the United States, we have a multimodal way of dealing with the puppy mills issue. First of all, we definitely want to educate the public about what puppy mills are, how to avoid them when you get a dog. But we're also involved in encouraging better legislation to stop puppy mills, to require, for example, puppy mills to be licensed and inspected so that somebody can check on the conditions of the dogs, and also to stop pet stores from selling puppies because pet stores are a primary outlet for puppy mill dogs.
So what are the kind of things that you guys are trying to get past as far as like the thing that's shocking to me? I'm sorry to back up and backpedal a little bit. I can't believe these things are legal, and hearing about the conditions that these pets, well, in this place, in this term, talking about puppy mills, a product, they're just treated so much like a product and not an actual animal, which of course would, I guess, be the humane part of humane society, and to try and get things legislated and pushed in that direction. Like, how are these legal, and how is it that the U.S. government or the whoever would regulate this has let this become such a problem? Because that's what we
Sure.
always want to know is like, how can we curb this? How can we push this towards a humane way?
Right. Well, that's a very good question. First of all, why are they legal? Basically, dog breeding, of course, is perfectly legal. And the question is, when a dog breeder starts to get more and more dogs and have worse and worse conditions, where exactly does the line come as far as being a great breeder and then a not so great breeder and then unfortunately a terrible puppy mill? There's often sort of a slide into poor conditions, even from somebody who starts out not so bad. And every state has different laws about what types of conditions you need to keep dogs in. For example, some states have no laws at all. As long as you're not violating the cruelty law, you can keep dogs in small little stacked cages that they never get let out of, as long as they have food and water. But other states say, well, if you have 10 or more breeding females or 20 or more breeding females, you have to get a license and you have to be inspected. So it's a different standard everywhere you go. And there's also no specific number of dogs that constitutes a puppy mill. So sometimes it's hard for law enforcement when they're getting complaints about a bad breeder for them to even know, well, what am I dealing with here? Is this do I have the authority to say you have to shut down your puppy mill, or you're neglecting dogs? It can be difficult if there's no specific laws in place.
Mm-hmm.
And to answer the last part of your question, the United States Department of Agriculture is charged with enforcing the Animal Welfare Act at large-scale pet breeders. The only problem is they only license pet breeders who sell sight unseen. So, for example, dog and cat breeders that sell to pet stores or even online to people that they don't meet are supposed to be licensed and inspected by the USDA. But somebody who sells directly to the public, even if they have 200 dogs in cages in their backyard, USDA doesn't regulate that.
Okay. It sounds like there's a lot of loopholes and different ways for this to continue in such an inhumane way. Like, what kind of legislation are you guys trying to get passed as far as how we can put this in a better spot? Because it doesn't sound like there's a lot of resources being put towards it Because what I was understanding from an earlier conversations at the USDA, the inspectors, there's roughly like 100. But that's for everything that involves animals like farms, zoos, and these puppy mills, if I understood
Right.
correctly. So it sounds like they're overworked and they're not really getting to visit these conditions to make sure things are on par. So what kind of things are you guys doing to actually initiate better quality of life for these dogs?
Sure. Well, we are supporting changes at USDA. We're encouraging them and pressuring them to be better about enforcing, because sometimes people have a lot of violations, but there's no real penalties. They're just being handed an inspection report saying, hey, you did some things wrong, but there's no penalty for them. So they continue to treat animals poorly, and they continue to have a license that makes it appear as if they're a quality licensed operation. So we are hoping for better enforcement and asking, meeting regularly with agencies about that. In addition, we're supporting the Puppy Protection Act, which is now in Congress and which anyone can write to their lawmakers about. The Puppy Protection Act would make the standards higher at USDA licensed facilities. So it would get rid of some of those common conditions we see at puppy mills, like the wire stacked cages, the wire floors. It would require the animals to have more space. They would have to be given indoor-outdoor runs, and it would require breeders, when they're done breeding dogs, rather than destroying them, to at least try to offer them to new homes so that those animals can have a comfortable retirement.
And that was the Puppy Protection Act?
The Puppy Protection Act, yes.
And it's currently in Congress right now.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful.
And then at the state level, we're supporting some bills that would end the sale of puppies in pet stores. And partly that's because some of the very agriculture-friendly states are not interested in passing laws right now to reduce the number of puppy mills. So we're looking at states that are willing to sort of cut them off at the outlets, which are the retail pet stores.
Okay. So you're, instead of focusing just nationally, you're trying to do like some more locally and just hit this in pockets and hit like target areas and try and cut it off from that perspective.
And so far, 5 states have passed laws banning the sale of puppies in pet stores. Okay. And, those people in those states can still get a pet from a quality breeder. They just need to go meet that breeder and check them out for themselves and make sure that the animals are taken good care of there. So it doesn't keep anybody from getting a dog. It just keeps them from buying them at these retail facilities where you don't know where they really came from, and where the pet store will show you a license and say, hey, look, all these dogs here came from licensed breeders. And your average person thinks, oh, that's great. That means they came from a place that's well regulated. And unfortunately, that's not always the case. Right. So, so this, 10% of the states have already passed these laws. And that just gives people a better chance to meet their breeder in person, which is what we always recommend.
Sure. Now, I know like a lot of things we've talked about on the show before is like there's actually a large number of purebred dogs in shelters and different things. So, and all that comes from like people getting a pet and not really understanding the pet, or thinking, oh, I've got to move. I just don't want this pet anymore, which to me is mind boggling. But what are the things that people can do to, if they're going to get a specific breed, or if there's something they really want and they're not really going to adopt, what are some resources they can use to help make sure like that I actually am getting a humanely raised or bred dog from the actual. Do you have any resources that we could share with our viewers to talk about that so they can make sure if they're going to make that choice, that it's an informed choice?
Sure. We have a webpage, humanesociety.org/breeders, and humanesociety.org/puppy, where we talk about how to get a puppy from a humane source. Okay. Definitely, you can always check your local shelter, and that's what we recommend first and foremost, because the various breeds do come into shelters. Some of the more in demand breeds might get adopted quickly. So sometimes you have to check back, more often, and just be a little bit patient if there's a specific type of dog that you want. There's also breed rescues that focus on just, there's a poodle rescue, there's a schnauzer rescue. So, check with those. But if you do decide to go to a breeder, the best thing to do is get a recommendation from a veterinarian or a national breed club. But don't stop there. Insist on meeting the breeder in person. You can wear a mask, you can, implement all the COVID protection guidelines that you feel you need to, But definitely meet them in person, because you want to know where the mothers and fathers are living. You don't just want to meet somebody in their garage with one puppy in their hands. You want to see where those moms and dads are, because otherwise you could be supporting somebody who is keeping the moms and dads in terrible conditions their whole lives. Another tip is to always make sure that they are giving you real veterinary records. Sometimes they'll give you a checklist that maybe they printed off their home computer that says this vaccine was given on this date, this vaccine was given on that date. But if it's not on veterinary letterhead, you don't know if they actually have a veterinary relationship with somebody who gave those vaccines at the appropriate time and the appropriate temperature and all those other things.
So what are some of the things that we can do locally and like on the state level as far as pet owners to try and help curb these kind of like puppy mills? Like I know, like, let's not buy from those puppy mills if we can help it. Let's try and stay from those. Like, let's adopt when we can and take care of two problems at once, and try and fix both of those. Do you have any other recommendations for our viewers that could actually help us put this down? I mean, like supporting the Puppy Protection Act, of course, and calling our congressperson and senators, but like to really make this, because the thing that shocked me is that there are so many of them, and that they were turning out this product so much and they're living in these just inhumane conditions that just to me doesn't sound legal. And when people
Right.
hear about like how is this legal, and that's what bothers me, is that
Mhm.
I wouldn't want to live that way, and I wouldn't want a pet that came from that, so I don't want to support that. But what are some of the things that we can really do to just put an end to this thing, or at least make it be done humanely?
Right. Well, definitely keeping in touch with your lawmakers and finding out what kinds of laws are being discussed that could help dogs. Some states, for example, don't have cost of care laws. And a cost of care law is a law that says, well, if somebody's suspected of animal cruelty and they have large numbers of animals seized, uh, a state with a cost of care law would say, well, if you're going to fight this in court, of course that's your right, but you still have to pay for the care of the animals while you're fighting this in court, because that can take sometimes years. So that will sometimes make somebody, if they don't have a good case and they know that they probably are going to lose, they will sign over the animals so the animals can be adopted quickly. Whereas states that don't have this law, the alleged perpetrator has no incentive to let those animals get released into good homes. And because guess who's caring for them? The local shelter. So the local shelter that already had its cages filled with animals that needed homes suddenly is caring for, say, 50 more animals. Where are they all going to go? And sometimes those, what they call them, the case dogs that have been seized, they're required by law to keep them. So for the entire course of the case, which might be a year or more, and that hurts the community, because that's taking away cage space that they need for other animals in the community that are looking for homes. So cost of care laws, ask your lawmakers about those. And, even some states that have them, they don't necessarily have really good ones. They might be full of loopholes. So.
And do you have resources on your website that people could look at as far as that too?
Yes.
What was your
Yes.
website?
humanesociety.org.
Okay.
And there's the state affairs page on there where people can look up their state director and find out how to get involved in those state level efforts.
Gotcha.
And then, of course, another thing people can do is simply make sure your friends and family know about puppy mills, know not to buy a puppy from a pet store or from a website from somebody you haven't met.
Of course. I think those are all great suggestions, and we definitely want to do our part in putting this where it belongs, which is behind us, because this, again, it's just shocking that this kind of treatment is legal and that we could treat animals that way and to have just such inhumane conditions. So what else can you leave us with today as far as something our viewers definitely need to know? Like, we want to share this information. We want you to get on these websites, check these out, support locally, state, all these laws. What else can we leave our viewers with today to help them understand, like, this is a real problem?
Well, think about being a little bit more wary and taking a little more time anytime you buy any kind of pet. Because sometimes when we fall in love with an animal, or we fall in love with the idea of having an animal, and that makes it hard to sometimes see when somebody is pulling the wool over your eyes.
Sure.
So, we have people contact us sometimes saying, well, I went on a website and somebody said that they were that they were a small breeder and that all their dogs were healthy and so on and so forth. But they said their house was hard to find. So they said, I can meet you in the local convenience store parking lot.
Ah,
Then the person buys the dog. By the time they get there and they're like, well, the dog doesn't smell very good. Something doesn't look very good. But by then they're sort of already committed to bringing home a dog. And so often they'll take the dog anyway. And then when they find out that the dog is sick later, they will want to contact the breeder. And, by that time, the person is long gone and they don't even know where that person lives.
those the right questions. Take your time.
Take your time, definitely.
Take your time. So what we're kind of curious about is how do you guys go about finding out these puppy mills, and what part do you play in taking these things down when they're not up to par? Like what is that process like for the humane?
Sure. Well, we sometimes get contacted directly from people who have purchased puppies from what turns out to be a potential puppy mill.
Mhm.
And sometimes we're contacted directly by law enforcement. If it's a puppy buyer, we do have a puppy buyer complaint form on our website, humanesociety.org/puppy complaint. If they complain to us, we do keep all those complaints in a database. So if we start seeing a pattern where somebody is breeder, there's a lot of complaints about a breeder, we might ask local authorities to look into it. We're not a law enforcement agency, so the Humane Society of the United States can't directly go to a puppy mill and say, hey, we're here to shut you down. But what we can do is tell local law enforcement, hey, we're hearing about a problem in your area. Will you check it out? If they then go out and find problematic conditions, and maybe they work with the breeder a little bit and say, hey, you have to bring things up to par, and then that doesn't happen, they might contact us again and we can help in some areas where I mentioned where the local shelter is already overwhelmed, already has its hands full. They might ask us to come out and help with removing the animals and taking care of the animals until the judge releases them. And then we'll help get them to areas of the country where there is room for them in shelters and where people are waiting to adopt them.
Gotcha. Well, I think you're doing great work, and we're so glad to have had you on the show today. It looks like we're about out of time. For more information on today's guest and today's episode, please visit our website, subscribe to our channel, follow us on Instagram, and like us on Facebook. I want to thank you for watching today and watching how to create a better quality life for all dogs. As always, I've been your host, Timothy Batten, and this has been Welcome Home Doggy.